The Mercedes gray market bubble of the 1980s explained. How do you like my bubble, you know? But anyway, since everybody's talking about a real estate bubble, and, you know, we had a stock bubble a year and a half ago, and there was the crypto bubble that is pretty much a non-bubble anymore. Although if you're Michael Saylor, you still seem to be hanging on with Bitcoin. Not that there's anything wrong with having some Bitcoin, but, you know, some bubbles don't burst as fast as others. We're going to talk about a bubble that was very briefly, very profitable for people in the automotive sales and repair industry. And that bubble is the gray market bubble. So in the 1970s, Mercedes was pretty much like a rich guy's car. If you had enough money for a 240D, you could also probably afford 2 Cadillacs and a nice house. You probably had an upper level job, or you had your own business and you were buying it through the company or something. It just wasn't a car that you could go out and buy unless you were very sound financially, or you had a lot of cocaine money. Now, during the late 1970s, some people figured out that you could go to Germany, buy a car, and import it in the United States, then make it DOT compliant, and then get that car into the U.S. market and sell it as a new car, an almost new car, and make a pretty decent buck on it while also passing the savings on to the consumer. So a lot of people who both set up big dealerships to do this and private individuals who would import 5 or 6 cars decided that they would start importing cars from Germany. A lot of these cars were Mercedes, but they were also Porsches and BMWs. But by and large, the majority of them were Mercedes. They'd make them EPA and DOT compliant, and then they'd sell them. So if somebody could buy, let's say, a 500 SEL, a US car in 1984, for like, I don't know, $55,000 new in the United States, that car would be something like $25,000, the equivalent of $25,000 in Germany. It's a huge expanse. You could bring it to the United States and prep it and everything and sell it for $40,000 as a 6-month-old used car. I don't know about you, but it sounds like everybody's winning. And as a result, these massive DOT and EPA compliance labs were set up. There were 3 of them. I think that, by the way, a lot of this information came from my friend Pete Van Rossum, who did this as a business for a few years. These EPA and DOT compliance labs would make sure that the cars passed emissions. Now, often the trick to getting a gas Mercedes to pass emissions would be the installation of a frequency valve to limit the amount of fuel that the car got, particularly at high RPMs when you were mashing the throttle to the floor. They changed the warm-up regulator to make the mixture a little bit leaner, especially under heavy throttle. They'd install catalytic converters because the Euro cars didn't have catalytic converters. They'd install an oxygen sensor in what was called a Johnson box to control the frequency valve, which controlled the overall mixture. And then sometimes they'd detune the engine a little bit, or, you know, make a few changes, like adding air conditioning if the customer wanted it, if they got like a 107 that didn't have AC. And then with the DOT side, which is Department of Transportation regulations, they would change the bumpers if needed. Some guys would change the bumpers, some wouldn't. I've never figured out why. Sometimes things got done and sometimes they didn't. Maybe there was a bribery scandal or something. They changed the headlights. Sometimes people would put the headlights right back in as soon as they left the DOT lab, you know, so that they could get better visibility at night. They would put reinforcements in the doors because your U.S. cars had bars in the doors to prevent serious side impact damage, and Euro cars did not. And so it's because the United States DOT had different crash resistance requirements. Now, I'm not sure if the bars and the doors helped. I heard of at least one situation where somebody used a wooden stick inside the door at the DOT and had the car DOT certified in Texas, which is a major port of entry for gray market cars, and got sued when the woman got into a side impact collision in her 107 and died because the door folded. I think that maybe the vehicle that hit her was probably substantially bigger than her car, which would make a lot of sense. You know, if a little door bar is not going to protect you if you get hit by a dump truck. But they wanted these things done to make sure that the cars were safe. Some cars towards the end of 1985 and 86 got a third brake light as well. Now, the gray market bubble was basically like 1978, 79, when you started to see a few cars trickling in and the DOT compliance is a new thing, all the way up to 1986. In 1986, the rumor has it that Ronald Reagan devalued the dollar because the dollar was absolutely crushing all the European currencies, and so he thought the fair thing to do would be to make the playing field more level. And while that looked good on paper, I think that today we're feeling the effects of it because our currency is actually weaker than the sterling pound or the euro. Who knows what could have happened if Reagan didn't devalue the dollar? I know the gray market boom would have continued for a much longer period of time because you could essentially now when you went to Europe with your dollars to convert them into Deutschmarks, you didn't get as many Deutschmarks per dollar. You know, before it was like $1 would give you 2 Deutschmarks. But the funny thing is the car that you were buying would be like either $50,000 or 50,000 Deutschmarks. Essentially, you could get the car for 50% off. You know, but this whole gray market thing set off a flurry of businesses, of people complying the cars, and there were DOT labs where they would get certified. The DOT loved this because they were making money off of it, but the parties that did not like it were Mercedes Benz, BMW, and Porsche, because people were bringing cars in and sidestepping the dealers. Now, Mercedes still sold a lot of cars back then, but this explains why you see so many 123 and 126 turbo diesels from this period of time, because those cars were not actually sold in Europe. You could buy a 123 turbo diesel wagon. It wasn't easy. They were like special order only, from what I understand. There weren't tons of them sold. Most of the ones sold in Europe were non-turbo. The United States got the majority, like 95% of the turbo diesel engine allocation. And people who really needed a turbo diesel, like me, driving 80 miles a day, you know, or more in my car, I would have paid the 24,000 extra dollars or so to get a 300D turbo because they were such fantastic cars. That's also by and large why a good chunk of the Mercedes in the United States today, their higher spec cars are gray market cars like Euro 500 SECs, because they were a much faster, better car than you could buy in a gasoline version in the United States. If today you were looking at a gray market car, just remember that these cars were often brought into the United States because they were a cheaper alternative, and they sometimes did not get maintained as well. And it doesn't mean that they're all bad. Some got maintained extremely well. Some were handpicked by their owners, and they used what was called a one-time DOT exemption or one-time EPA exemption to bring them in. That means they never got the cats or the frequency valve. Everybody got one. So did everyone's grandmother and sister and dead uncle and their neighbor's cat. So some people would buy EPA allocations from their friends, neighbors, and family that used them to import cars. And it was perfectly legal as long as your name was in all the paperwork, you know, it could be done. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share the video and subscribe to our channel. And if you own a gray market Mercedes, that's pretty cool because I love those cars. So they're a lot of fun. And thank you again to my friend Pete Van Rossum for sharing his experience certifying gray market cars during the 1980s. The man lived to tell the tale without losing his mind. I think he may have lost some of his hair, but he didn't lose his mind. So we'll see you guys in the future with another great Mercedes video.